thought they didn't want to play. And they weren't very good at the first tryouts. And I thought, I don't want to play on this team. It's going to be so boring. Women's hockey is going to be so bad. And so I went to my second tryouts as a defenseman and made the team as a defenseman. But I didn't really understand how big the Canada Games was. Like that really, it was the first time the Canada Games existed. Nobody knew that that would be like this amazing scouting opportunity. For me, it was just, it wasn't boys hockey, so it wasn't as good in my mind. I mean, it was terrible thinking at the time, but that's what was just kind of bombarded on me growing up. So that's, you know, I internalized that notion. It wasn't until I got to the Canada Games and I saw how good all these other girls were. I was like, whoa, this is pretty incredible.
Well, I'm glad you made the right choice. So now, Matt, I'm not sure if you know Richard or not, Matt. Richard Berkeson. Are you familiar with each other?
I've heard the name, Rich, but I never met. So pleased to meet you.
Have you heard it in a good way, a bad way, a legal way?
Yeah.
You can do it a legal way.
It was all positive. I'm sure it was in the context of whether it was the Whitby women's or I can't remember the context, but my sense is that it was certainly positive.
You must know. You know Rick Ledusser, I believe.
Not well.
Well, he was at Queens for a while.
Mm-hmm.
He was doing the athletics. He was doing facilities management or something a couple of years ago.
Oh, Rick. Yes, of course. Yeah. That's exactly it. Yeah. I lost the context there. Yeah. He was with us internally in the department for about 3 years, maybe. Yeah. Good guy.
Yeah.
Well, listen, we could spend the day giving our bios. Maybe we'll just get right into it. So, Kim was working out. Okay. You have to slow these things down and keep them up longer for me to follow, Kim. My brain
that was Sammy. And if you click on your chat, you can see it going. It doesn't go away, Wally. Don't worry. It just appears one time, but then it's permanently there on your chat.
All right. Well, it's big enough for me to read. There it is. Okay. Good. Well, listen, I just sort of wanted to, I really didn't know what we were going to chat about today. And we usually have people on. Richard's on. He's got stories he can tell. But I wanted to carry over from last week. And I may try to get a hold of Saul Miller and see if he'd like to join us again. But we got into a little bit of debate with the use of nicknames. And Morris and Saul, they sort of hashed over the debate of whether or not Coma was a good nickname to use with a player. And when I talked to Morris after that in the afternoon, and the player's name was Dave Christensen from the Jets, it really made sense. And I think at the NHL level, you can have a positive nickname or a negative nickname, and they just sort of seem to fit what the team wants. And so Dave Christensen's name, Coma, it obviously meant he had some blank moments on the ice where he might have turned the puck over or done some things that the people scratch their head, but it became his nickname. And the debate was, it was, well, not a positive thing to do and wondering what it did, but I can certainly live with it at that level. Let those boys figure it out. Now, Rick Puttick is on, and I was going to get Rick to mention he shared some great stories with me about his use of nicknames and some of them that resonated. And before I turn it over to Rick, my nickname as a player, and I had both a good one and a bad one. And I didn't mind either one, but I sure like Cozy better than Crow's Ass. So your last name sort of fits into it. Now, Rick, later on in the presentation, I was going to get Kim to show her Zoom session and talk about her ability to do skill development online, which she did last week, and she said she had a pretty good session, and I sort of invited her to share that with us. But Rick, would you begin the nickname talk and take off from there? And I'd be curious later on about everybody's nicknames, if they had any, And if you've got any other nickname stories to add, go ahead. Rick
Thanks,
Puttick,
Walt.
please.
Thanks, Wally. I don't know if it's that grand of a story, but as I mentioned last week in the session, I made a point very early on in my coaching of introducing the concept of nicknames to every group. I just felt from some of my learning back in the day that it would help foster team togetherness. So we went through exercises early in the season to establish, I hope would be positive nicknames. And quite frankly, back in those days, we weren't as concerned about how things were interpreted as we are. We're very much more sensitive today to it. So it can take on a different connotation. But, more recently, I had a female bantam team where I had two particular D partners. One was named Michaela and the other was named Kate. But they were really good buddies, if you would, on the ice, off the ice, on the bench. They always played together. Uncommon to me, coming from the male side of the game, they actually smiled and danced and had a good time together when they were on the ice. Took me a while to adjust to that and find it as a positive as opposed to a negative. But with their names, they were so close that people started calling them Mac and Cheese. And it's kind of a unique name for that pair, but it has stuck with them, and it's still with them whenever they're together, and they're still good friends. I don't see them very much any longer because I'm not coaching them, but it's just one of those positive stories that came out of it. And I, as I alluded to earlier, in the 80s and 90s in particular, when I started coaching, we weren't as sensitive to the politically correct side of things. So nicknames were just interpreted for what they were, I think, is probably the best way to put it. And I acknowledge that today we need to be just a little more cautious with what we're calling people and what's behind it, make sure that it isn't interpreted in a negative fashion. But I've always been a big fan of them. Most of them were just adding the EY or the OER, the cozy or the putter or the whatever. One of my teammates nicknamed me Peter Puck once, which I took to be a compliment, but some people may even take that to be a negative connotation. So. But I still, even in my work life today, I still use the nickname concept with coworkers that I'm particularly associated with on an ongoing basis.
Rick, I'm just going to remind everybody, Tim suggested if you had anything to offer at any time to do a raised hand. So the speaker, I don't think can see raised hands, but just relative to that, Sammy, I don't recall working with the national women's team, and it could be memory loss for me, the use of nicknames. And I don't know if you had one or you remember anything related to growing up, but go ahead.
Yeah, within the women's team, there certainly was a lot of nicknames, and the two nickname givers. So that also is a whole nother part of the dynamic is who becomes the nickname giver and how does it stick. So the two nickname givers were Vicky Sanahara and then Jillian Ferrari, and both super respected within the community. And the nicknames that stuck tended to be tamer. But like Jillian Ferrari was Fur Dog. Vicky was Puppy. Everybody, Apsy was Apu after the Simpsons character. Everybody seemed to Jana Hefford was Hef, or Sheffy because she also cooked a lot. Everybody seemed to have one. I had a unique name in that my real name is Samantha, so Sammy was kind of a nickname. And I think people tended to gravitate towards that. So I think, every situation was different, but there could be some very harsh nicknames, and that's where I think it sometimes crosses the line when the person doesn't want it, and how do you get out of it? So that you know, when they're just light and easy, I don't feel like that's a discussion point. But when it is on the verge of bullying, how do you, and maybe Jordan can talk a little bit more about that because he's in the school environment where that's more prevalent. How do you get out of that? You know, you're called fatty, or you're called two eyes, or you're called whatever, and you know that sticks with everybody. So perhaps that's the discussion point.
Good. I'm curious, you know, just about everybody, any nickname stories, good or bad, that they learned from and would do differently today. Now, he's managed to get on, and Morris used a nickname that created a little bit of debate within our group. And I know I talked to people after about it. And in talking to Morris, I really appreciated the way that nickname was used in that context of that particular team. So I'm glad Morris is on. So Kim, go ahead.
I was just going to mention I didn't get a lot of nicknames when I played, but when in high school I had two nicknames, and I'm still in touch with a lot of my teammates from Leaside because they're all coaches now. But apparently my nicknames were Chainsaw and Hollywood, and I have no idea why either one. And now I'm too embarrassed to ask because they obviously called me that and still call me that, and I have no idea why I was called either one of those things. So that's just a little funny tidbit. I guess the only challenge I've had with nicknames is I've had so many sisters over the years. And so often nicknames are kind of a play on the last name. And then when I keep getting the younger sister after the older sister, I can't call them by the same nickname. Like, for example, I've had two sisters whose last names are Van Den Oodler. Like, clearly you need to shorten that. So we call them VDO, but then I called the older sister VDO, and then I couldn't call the second one VDO because I associated with the other one. So it's a good problem to have. But I find in girls hockey, they all have the same name. Like, you get on a team and there's 4 Abbies or there's 6 Ashleys, all spelled differently, of course. So it's challenging. Maddies, I had 2 Maddies. I've had only one team ever that didn't have a multiple first name in the history of coaching. So often the last name becomes the key for the nicknames. But yeah, I have no idea where my 2 high school nicknames came from. So I'm too embarrassed to ask. So I'll just take it and go with it.
You recall last week, Kim, you made mention of the timing as a coach and selection of nicknames. And with Richard on, and who didn't hear it last week, I wonder if you could repeat the points you brought up before we turn to Matt.
Sure. The point I brought up last week is that when you've coached players for multiple years, and someone like Matt, who's got them for 4 or 5 years in university, would certainly know this, is the incoming players don't have nicknames yet, or at least not nicknames that you've provided them. And so we try very hard early in the season to minimize the use of anyone's nickname so as to not make anyone feel out of place, right? So especially at the junior level, you can have quite a bit of turnover from year to year. It's not uncommon to have at least half the team turnover from year to year. And so if you're calling 6 or 7 players by their nicknames and being all buddy in training camp for the first month, and simply calling those other players by their first name or their last name, it's a potential way, it's not inclusive, I guess, is the best way of putting it. So, it's funny when you go back to their real name and they don't respond because you haven't called them their first name in 3 years. But it's a way of evening the playing field, making everyone feel more comfortable.
Matt Holberg.
Yeah, I completely agree with what Kim was saying, and I agree with what Saul said last week about just being very careful. It's pretty dangerous just as a coach to right off the bat in the first couple of weeks start using the same nickname that you hear the other players calling that particular player, because you don't know how it came up, what the circumstances were. Even though it might sound completely innocuous, there might be a story behind it that is either inappropriate or certainly that the player doesn't like at all. And what I've done a couple of times, because you hear it, you can't help but hear it on the ice or on the bench or around the team. And when there's been a time when I've sort of wondered about it, when I have my player meetings, of course, with my assistant coach present, I might ask the player. I don't ask them how the nickname arrived. I just ask them how they feel about it and whether it's something that they're comfortable with, because they may not feel comfortable going to their teammates and saying, I don't like this. But there's been a couple of times when I've gone back to the captains in a respectful way and said, look, this isn't coming from the player, but I don't like the sound of this nickname, and I think you guys better pick a new one. So I'm not putting her in a tough spot with her teammates. We're kind of resolving the problem behind the scenes. But I'd say in 12 years, that's happened probably about 5 or 6 times. You know, and I think as a coach, I think it's good to come up with your own nickname. And most of the nicknames that I've come up with players are ones that just riff off their name. So again, adding an S or an IE at the end, it's pretty simple. And I think, but reserving, you know, calling them by their proper name for the first little while and waiting till they get comfortable with you and vice versa, I think, as Kim mentioned, is completely appropriate. And then I think as that comfort level grows and the trust factor grows, then I think that's okay. And the nickname that the coach could have for the player could be, you know, a little bit different than what the players have for each other. And I've even had players, I've even had rookies arrive and take ownership right out of the gate. Like before Queens players are able, or myself are able to provide them with a nickname, they'll come up and say, this is what I've been called in the past. And if you're going to call me something nickname wise, I want this to stick. So they actually take ownership in it right away, which kind of helps. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. And then there's also been other times where I've known what the players call a player. I've known from talking to the player that she's comfortable with it. It's not a problem. And as a coach, I find that actually is a pretty useful tool to keep that in your back pocket. So you might call her by her normal name, you know, 99% of the time, but you know, there could be a moment where some levity is required or some special attentions required or whatever. And then I'll pull out the nickname in front of the whole team, and it just sort of lightens the mood. So I know we had a player a number of years ago. Her nickname was Cookie. There was nothing bad about it. I talked to her about it. I always called her by her first name, but there was a time in the dressing room when things were a little tense, and I called her Cookie, and it just sort of lightened the mood. Right? The team couldn't believe that I called her that. Right? So I think you can actually use it positively in that respect. But I knew ahead of time that she wouldn't mind, and I knew that the positive effect it could have. The last thing I'll mention, or 2 other things actually. One quick story. There was a player that we had, her first name was Carrie, but everyone always called her by this particular nickname. And I was on the bench, so she was in front of me sitting on the bench watching the play. And so her back was to me, and she wasn't the next one up, but something happened on the ice, and I wanted her to get on the ice really, really quickly. And I started yelling, okay, Carrie, Carrie, Carrie. And she wasn't turning around. She wasn't moving at all. Carrie. And I ran down, and I was basically in her ear. And by then the line change had actually, you know, the next D pairing had gone out, and it was lost. And I tapped her on the shoulder, and I said, didn't you hear me? And she goes, what? No. And she goes, nobody calls me Carrie. I said, well, did you hear me yelling Carrie? She goes, I thought you were talking to someone on the ice, like carry the puck. Right. So you actually sort of have to be aware of that. They actually will start to tune out their own name if they've been called a nickname for so long. And I had to work on that with her, right? In terms of, okay, like there's actually a disadvantage to ignoring that as well. So I think that there's a time and place, and there's certainly some good usage to it. The last thing I'll mention is it's a 2-way street, and I'd be interested to get your feedback on this, because certainly every rookie, when they come in with us, they'll right away they'll call me Coach Matt, maybe Coach Holmberg, or just Coach. And I'm okay with any one of them. But it's interesting over the course of 4 or 5 years how, without me saying anything, that'll start to transform to Matt. And, you know, like a year or 2 ago, I was talking to one of our 4th or 5th year players, and she just referred to me as Homeby. And that's a nickname I've never had, and it's one I'd never heard of. But it's clear to me that some of the vets had started to shorten it even to that, right? And she was one of our captains, and I felt familiar around her, but it sort of struck me as a bit odd, and was one of the first times where it was a reverse situation where the players themselves, and I hope it was a situation where they felt comfortable enough, but you know, without asking me or really, I mean, obviously just a riff on my name, but so I thought that was kind of an interesting, you know, and I could see where that could be a bit of a problem in terms of a respect issue. I guess you'd have to be pretty comfortable with the situation, but it's certainly happy to get your thoughts on the reverse situation about the players nicknaming the coach.
Morris, you started this last week, and I'm glad we got her going.
Matthew, boy, that was a couple of interesting pieces there. That's it was quite funny that she actually didn't respond to her real name. That's a classic story, and yet it's understandable, and so a good piece. You know, one, I wanted to say thanks for anybody that logged in last week and listened. I love delivering that talk, and what's cool is every time I deliver it, I get feedback on how to improve it, and so I didn't think there was a negative side to nicknames. I thought it was nicknames could really be used in a positive way, and but so I'm going to give some attention to that. Also, Kim had mentioned something around she's about her thinking, and actually there's been lots of work done on this, how people are divided into 4 different groups, and it's a piece I'm going to add to this, and that we actually, these groups are different personality types. But what I've seen in it is they actually like to listen, or they actually like specific words better than others. And it's based on a king, warrior, lover, magician. I'm not sure if anybody's ever read the book. It's a good one. And I'm going to add this piece in because actually people like to because when we speak in the language that group actually speaks, the trust bond is built bigger and deeper. And then actually when they like to be listened a certain way too. And when they're listened that way, they feel respected, and the trust bond grows further yet. So it's a piece I'm going to add to this, and although it goes pretty deep. You know what? I'm going to just finish. I'm going to get going to work. There's 2 pieces though. One is that in Winnipeg, originally when we came from Houston to Winnipeg, one of our defensemen, who had been there for quite a long time, his nickname was Buzzard. And it was Buzzard, wow. And so I did not call him that for a long time, and then I always called him Barry. And then I finally asked somebody, why is he called Buzzard? And they said, well, one time he got into this situation with somebody else, and he took his stick up in the air and he whacked the guy on the head as he was down on the ice. He gave it to him, and somehow the guys interpreted this as like a buzzard coming in, and for this hit on the. So it was kind of it had I thought a real negative connotation to it, and then as I got to play with him, I realized that actually the nickname fit pretty good. But then I went over and I asked him. I said one day, I just said, "Hey, are you okay if I call you Buzzard?" And he said, "Oh yeah, everybody calls me Buzzard." No, okay. So actually, I requested for permission first because we were just becoming new teammates, and he said, "Oh yeah." So it was strange, even though the nickname had him whacking somebody with a stick. He didn't carry a negative connotation with it because it's who he was. He whacked just about everybody. And then one last little piece was that it was funny how a nickname one time generated us a goal, because I was playing with LA at the time, and the puck came up the boards. We were playing against Winnipeg, and Randy Carlisle got the puck, and his nickname was Kitty, short for Kitty Carlisle. Why he ever got Kitty, I don't know. But it was Kit. And Bernie Nichols, who I was playing with LA, so the puck came up to right about the hash marks in the boards, and Randy got it, and he went to pass it, and Bernie actually said Kitty, and Kitty Carlisle, I couldn't believe it, passed it straight to Bernie Nichols, like right out of the tape. And it was funny because he actually kind of did a double take. He passed it, and then when he saw who he'd pass it to, he kind of went like this, and Bernie got it, and he walked right in and scored. And Bernie paid a price later on because Randy chopped him across the arm pretty good. But it was interesting how the nickname was used to actually get the puck from the other team. So it's going to finish on that story. Hey, any questions from last week or?
No, I just wanted to mention, Morris, I talked to Cal Botterill at length about last week's session, and I'm hoping to get both Cal and Saul on again. And Cal was going to go into the nicknames concept and his historical experience in sports psychology with that. He was quite intrigued by it, and he may join us down the road, and if we can make a formal arrangement to have him and Saul on, that would be a pretty exciting duo. My concern with not concern, but my wish with both of them is finding out how times have changed in terms of their industry and what their perception of things that are going on now and how they've changed down the road. Richard, go ahead. Your hands up.
Thanks.
Thanks. I never used players' nicknames that they gave each other. I always felt I take that teacher approach because that's my background, that I wanted to keep that distance between, particularly with the older players. I mean, the younger ones, I remember coaching AAA, Bantam AAA 3 years ago, a team I got by accident, and the nickname of one of the kids was Fur, F-U-R. And I was really hesitant to ask anybody how he got that nickname because at 13 he was shaving. So I asked him, how did you get that nickname, if I may ask? And he says, well, I've had a beard since I was like 11 or 12. And so the boys called him Fur. I was not going to call him Fur. I called him by his first name, and I've always called the players by their first name unless they said to me, it's okay to call me, Buster or, Rob Z or, whatever it was they came up with. But I always had a real problem, and maybe it's the old fashioned me and the teacher in me, but I always had a problem with coaches of the older players, like in junior in particular, who called the players by their nicknames on the ice or in the room. It just seemed to be bridging that. It's like when I see coaches on the bench in minor hockey with adults with the ball caps backwards. I'm going, you're not 14, okay? Let the 14-year-olds do that. I have a real issue with that. It seems silly, but it's like teachers coming to school in May wearing shorts. I get no, or flip flops, no. No, it's wrong. What are you going to do about it? As a former VP and department head, I'm not going to do anything about it. You just look like an idiot. Sorry, you're not 14. So I always felt that there needs to be that chasm that should not be bridged between coach player, teacher student. I remember in school there would be students that other students would call by their nicknames in class because they were the jocks. So all the basketball players knew each other. So, they knew that the 5 jocks in the class, you could call them by their nicknames. I went, no. His name is Paul. Her name is Susan. His name is Jack. Call them by their nicknames. Okay. That's just me. And did it work or not work? I don't know. You'd have to ask my former students and players, but I never wore a ball cap on the bench, and I never called them by their nicknames unless they expressly said, it's okay, you can call me Kingsy, so. And funny, I just saw that note about sending a vice principal home because I was also the union rep for about 18 years in Ottawa at the school I taught at. And I had a couple of incidents where teachers were called onto the carpet by the principal, and the teacher called for what they were wearing, flip-flops or whatever, particularly the females. And they called me in as the union rep to cover their butt. So I would sit there and listen, and then outside the principal's office, I'd say, the principal is perfectly justified. You dress however you want, but you've lost respect from admin and from me for dressing the way you are. Well, the kids like it. I don't care. You're the adult. We're the adults. We're the leaders. They're the kids. They're the players. I'm done now.
Anybody want to add anything? Jordan?
Wally, I can just add. I think it really depends on the environment you're trying to build, and I really liked Morris's take on the shorthand to communication. I think which was really insightful. I noted that Dave King always used nicknames in his communication with players, which is interesting. And then you can contrast that with how some coaches really want to set up a formalized type of communication in their teams, almost using yes sir, no sir, using last names, that sort of thing only. So it really, I think it depends on your team and on your culture that you're building. And again, to Morris's point last week, if you really want to get trust and buy-in from your players, that shorthand in communication by using nicknames that are appropriate and respectful may be an avenue to facilitate that communication. But on the other hand, if it erodes that trust and it takes away from concise communication, then you want to be able to maybe use first names or maybe even last names. So I think there's a real continuum there, and it's the art of coaching that we're talking about in terms of trying to get that concise communication and build trust and shared leadership in your team.
I'd agree, Malcolm, that's probably comes right down to the respect side of things and asking your players or whomever you're working with what they would like to be referred as. And I do know that, of course, nicknames can be either that they're either terms of endearment or the opposite. And of course, you had nicknames of players on your own team, but sometimes I went back when I was playing, there were nicknames that you provided other players on opposition teams too, and things that people would use with them. And so it's an interesting one. But as a coach, I think that it comes down to that whole piece of communicating in a respectful manner and communicating with them, like asking those questions. Are you okay if I hear people using this nickname? Where did it come from? And that piece. But I grew up. My community was next door to Viking, where of course the Sutter brothers all grew up. And I think that 90% of the people in that town had nicknames, and some of them ended up being called the junior of the nickname that their father had. And there were people that I, to this day, do not know their actual first name because it was never referred to in any time in anything that we were doing. So, so I don't know. It's a really interesting conversation, and that dress code thing, that's a hot button issue, and as we're moving towards the summer, that's one too. But I don't know what people's take is. I know that of course Don Cherry was always talking about what young players should look respectable coming to the rink, but does that mean a shirt and tie? Today, obviously, I'm not wearing a shirt and tie, and it's because of an activity we've got going on. The majority of the days I will in my work, because I guess the rule I go by with my staff is that that is one I borrowed from a mentor that said that when a person walks in off the street, they should be able to pick you out from another person that walked in off the street. You should look like you belong there and that you're somebody that they're entrusting your children or their children to. And as far as an administrator goes, well, then they should probably be able to pick me out of a lineup from a teacher. So I usually dress a little more formal than what teachers do. So the flip-flops and yoga pants and all of those things can tend to be an issue. And I always also go by the rule that the more casually you are dressed, probably the more casually you are taking everything about your day. So those are just my 2 cents.
Well, we've got 2 hands up, and Richard, I think yours was first. I'm curious about Morris. He was nodding his head to one of the statements, but Richard, go ahead first and then Morris. Or if you forgot to put your hand down, Richard.
I forgot to put my hand down. Sorry.
Okay. Go ahead, Morris.
I was reading the chat and I'm laughing. And I was actually going like this because I was chuckling about how this nickname, High Chair and Crib, because I know Carla. Carla. This is so funny. You know, Heatley was somehow more from wick to chick to chicken. And high chair. Oh my gosh. So now you know what? So in our talks, I'm changing the way I'm looking at this. Like I used the idea of names in order to build trust with the players. So the idea of the nickname for myself was to use it only when something really good happened, like a big play, a big hit, and it was to build the trust bond between myself and the player. And so the thing is that I would now, in player meetings at the start of the year, with each player, I would find out what their nickname is, if they want to tell me how they got it, and but then I'd ask for permission to be able to use it in an appropriate time. So just our discussions have made me aware that it would be good to get permission from the player first. So, anyways, that's my thoughts. You know what? Thanks very much. This was quite entertaining. Next time I see Carla, I'm going to call her Crib. Okay. See you guys. Thanks.
Bob, you spent quite a few years in the junior ranks. What was your take on that?
Well, I did use nicknames, but I didn't use nicknames that unless I knew the players were good with it. But I also would never use a nickname if I was having a one-on-one meeting with a player. That'd be a little bit more formal, so I would use their name. Like if I was going to have a meeting with Wally, I would call him Wally. I wouldn't call him Cozy. If I was making a line change, I'd say, Cozy, you're up. I mean, that sort of thing. But I think a nickname should be an uplifting nickname, unless it's something that's derived from a funny moment or something. But I don't think you want to give a nickname. Personally, I wouldn't want a player to have a nickname that is kind of derogatory or puts him down or puts his mind in some other place where, Jesus, I wish they wouldn't say that to me. You know, you all know Noodles on TV. Like, he had multiple nicknames. He was the most superstitious guy you ever seen, but he wanted to be called Noodles. It's plain and simple. And if I called him Jamie, he'd just give me this kind of a dumb look, like, come on, coach. Right? He wanted Noodles. So, you know, you got to kind of go with what I think the player likes or appreciates. But I would never, if I was talking to Noodles in a one-on-one, it would be Jamie. It would not be Noodles.
Kim.
Well, I like the discussion about like kind of game day apparel or coaching apparel. Like Richard, I'm a no hat person on the bench. I don't know where I got it from. It's just actually a lot of my coaches growing up wore hats, so I'm not sure what I have against it, but I'm a big believer in that. I also usually let my players pick their game day apparel, so what they wear to the rink on a game day. And, you know, it's a little different with the girls. They don't usually want to wear a, you know, suit and tie, and it often matters, you know, what color the team colors are, right? So there's teams in our league who, you know, are blue and yellow, and they want to wear khakis because it looks better than black pants or what have you. So, you know, I basically let them choose, and it's a way to build ownership that they, you know, they get to choose how they want to represent themselves. And I've never had them represent themselves poorly. Like they've never elected to wear tracksuits or running shoes. It always is a step above maybe even what I would wear personally. I'm pretty casual, as Sammy alluded to earlier. They're usually a step above that. So I think they see what they, you know, is in the NHL, and you know, I have had the occasional girl wear a skirt, but for the most part, they exceed what I would even necessarily choose for them or dictate to them. But they seem to do a great job of it, and it's just another way early in the season to increase the amount of ownership that they take of it. And you know, they'll call each other out on it if they're not, you know, meeting those expectations as the season goes on, and all those sorts of things. So it's something I, you know, other than the hats on the bench for the coach, and you know, and represent, you know, making sure you're wearing, you know, team colors. Other than that, I'm not too picky. But you know, I did want to address what Matt said about coach nicknames. And my experience with that is I don't usually get any. I usually am either Kim or Coach Kim, both of which I'm fine with. But it seems that the players who have more nicknames, as Bob was alluding to, right? Noodles has got a bunch of nicknames. I have one player who must have 7 or 8 nicknames. She's the one who always wants to call me by a nickname, ironically, right? So the players with the more nicknames seem to want to dole them out a little bit more quickly as well. But yeah, I think you, it's what I always say is you promote, or what you allow, you promote. So if you're going to show up wearing a hat backwards as a coach, then you're saying that's okay for your players to do the same thing. And if you are going to use, you know, derogatory nicknames or inappropriate nicknames, you're also promoting that to your players. So that's an important piece that we always share with our players as well.
I also think you have to be careful with nicknames with smaller kids, because parents get a perception of what that nickname is, and that can be not received very well. So I think you have to be a little bit careful. With boys in particular, they'll come up with nicknames that are probably not appropriate, that parents don't need to hear, right? So I think you have to be, as a coach, you have to make sure that you're filtering that out of the room as well.
I'm really curious. Having worked with Tom Malloy a number of years, I don't recall nicknames being a part of the groups that I've worked with you on. Any comments, Tom, on the use of nicknames and that kind of thing? You were the guy who professionally separated yourself from the players, and yet you were attached to them. You're one of the best people at connecting with your players that I've seen, and you're working with a college team now, and starting to build in your culture. But I'm just curious about your take on it. And then after that, Al Ramsey, we've been talking nicknames since we started. It comes from last week's session, and Al's in the minor hockey industry, of course, in Northeastern United States. So, Tom, any comments?
I just got to turn off this. Sorry. I got to turn off one because the power went off of one. So let's see if I can get it off here. Sorry. I'll get in another room so it isn't about the echo. On my iPad, the power ran off, so I got to go to my phone. No, I don't use nicknames very much, but I don't. Maybe I do. I don't really know. I know I had at college, my nickname was Took. And I was just there like last year doing a tour, and the coach, that's what he called me. And a lot of people don't know my name there. They have no idea what my name is. And then when I was coaching the Koreans here, Murray Heatley was around and nobody spoke English, and they'd come and say, "Coachy, coachy," to talk to me. So Murray heard that, and that's what I was, being called for like 25 years. And there's a lot of people that don't know my name; they just know Coachy. So nicknames can stick for sure. But there are a lot of guys I just call their nickname, and a lot of guys I call by the first name. So yeah, I don't really, I don't think I call players by their nickname very much, but I don't really know. So
Al, I'm curious about Al Ramsey at the age level you were working with, which is, U8 going to U10. Nicknames starting to be common, or where are you at with that, and where are kids at today?
Well, I can only speak really for our group. I think in terms of the coaches and that, everybody usually just goes by coach and a first name, right? So Coach Al or just Coach, one or the other. Coach Ramsey every so often, and it's the same. It's pretty common, I think, for all of our coaches. That's the way it is. Usually Coach and their first name. For the players, I think at our age level, it's not really coming out yet. Most of the kids, they just call each other by their first name, and that's it. Every so often you throw out maybe a last name, but for the most part, it's they're just going by their first names and being kids. I think we probably have a little bit of that with our older age groups. That's starting to creep in probably around the Bantam age. It seems to be when the kids start, doing that kind of stuff. But I'm not typically working with those teams as much unless it's in a skills setting. So I can't really comment too much, honestly, Wally. I think you're on mute, Wally.
Kim, I'm really happy to have written that letter of recommendation for you to become a skills coach with Hockey Canada. And your reply last night commenting on Zoom calls you've been having and holding over a number of years, but particularly this year, teaching skills online. And you mentioned last week's session. And I really would be interested, as I think many people would that are still involved in coaching, sharing some of that you mentioned last night, if you can, about, you said the sessions went quite well. The thing that amazes me with Kim's work, she's been able to make quite a season out of it through Zoom using her imagination, but to use it in terms of skill development and hockey sense has been rather unique, and I think it's an untapped side of the game. So Kim, you can take the stage if you can handle it with your hands full.
Well, with these two, I'm never front and center on stage, obviously. So I'll do my best. Thanks, Wally. So part of the reason I brought up the Zoom sessions when we were talking about the reference letter was part of applying to be a Hockey Canada certified skills coach is they want you to send on ice video of you teaching. So I said to Corey McNabb, well, I haven't been on ice teaching since November, but I can send you a lot of video clips of me in my yellow garage. And he had a chuckle because I've known Corey for many years. So I'm sure I inundated him with those. But I started doing something different this week. I had a free camp I ran last week. I had over 100 people at, and then I have 50 people this week, 50 girls. But as I looked at the registration, the majority of them have done the majority of my online camps, which is crazy, since last March. So I thought, okay, I've got to make it a little different. I mean, I don't have to, but I want to. And so I'm not teaching any skills differently, but what we do at the end of every hour-long session is we have a daily challenge, and they can submit a video of themselves doing the challenge to me, and then they win a prize. So what I decided to do this week is, because I've done 500 plus of these sessions now, is the 5 sessions this week all build on each other. So Monday's session was setup moves or fakes, so a basic deke, weight shift, go one way, pull the puck the other way. And so I said, okay, I want you to show me your best setup move. You can finish it with a shot on net or whatever. And I had 25 of the 40 girls send me a video clip. of them doing a setup move. Junior players all the way down to little U9 players. And they all submitted the video. And then I picked a winner and I announced the winner the next day. And then the second day camp was focused on shooting in stride, which you can teach off the ice surprisingly well, actually. So the idea of marrying the shot and step. And so the second day challenge was, now I want you to combine your setup move with marrying your shot and step. So we took what happened in day one. Yes, that's true. Women's rec players are taking the session too. So on day one, it was setup moves. Day two was shot and stride, but the challenge on day two was to combine them. And then the day three, yesterday we worked on puck protection. So 3 or 4 different skills to protect the puck. So the challenge last night was, okay, now you need to combine a setup move and a puck protection move with a shot and stride. So I show them a couple examples, but then they submit videos which look nothing like my examples. Sometimes they're hilarious because it's a 9-year-old and their interpretation of what that means is quite funny. And then the junior players just blow it out of the water. But the reason I started doing it was largely based on what we talked about in the Shark session was, was just asking instead of telling. A lot of the time the skills are try to do 50 of these or how many of X can you do? Whereas this time was, well, be creative. Show me what you can do, right? And so I'm picking not always the best move because, of course, usually the junior players would win most of those, and sometimes a U10 kid wins. But it's really neat to see what they've come up with. It's actually way better than the challenges I did for the last 12 months because now they're creative and they're way more engaged. So in past challenges, if I had 40 people enrolled, 5 to 10 of them would try to win the prize. Now I'm getting 60 to 70% of them trying to win the prize every single day. And even the kids who've already won the prize trying to win some more. So, today we're going to work on changing the shot angle. So now I'm going to ask them to combine, well, some of them might not be able to do 4 of the things, but 3 or 4 of the things together. So I don't know. Yeah, it's mostly just keeping myself learning and interested by changing it up. I'm sure I could still run the same Zoom sessions I did last March. And no one would be the wiser, but it's actually worked out really well. And you guys would be pretty impressed, actually, some of the stuff these girls are coming up with if you just let them be creative. It's really neat to see. And you can see they're really understanding what I'm teaching them, right? Because if they send me a video of a setup move and it doesn't look like what we taught, then I know they didn't understand. Right? If I talk to them about marrying the shot and step and they show me these videos and they're not doing it, then it tells me they didn't understand. So by virtue of them sending it and checking each box as we layer things on, I know they've learned it. So it's actually validating for me, especially you're teaching in the Zoomiverse. None of them have their cameras on because it would crash the whole thing. So I actually can't see what they're doing. So it's a great way for me to validate. And then, of course, when they email me their video, I say, hey, next time, try to get your left hand away or try to shoot off your other foot. So, various tricks of the trade, I guess I've learned in the Zoomiverse over the last little while.
Alan, you shared video of your U8 kids with me recently in one of the last games they've played. And, I was thinking of you as she was talking because you were the first one that really began to share that random kind of learning, that open-mindedness and trusting the kids to figure things out, which I think the coaching has progressed from telling. Well, I think we've gone from yelling to telling. It's too much telling and now being able to ask. And it's had an impact on your team and your players. And it may have an impact extending to your hockey community out there. So Richard, and just in keeping with our background of the teaching modules, level 1 to 5 in the old days, where we were really good at teaching and breaking down skills and an awful lot of telling, the ability to translate those skills into game performance and decision making sort of rests with the freedom of play and allowing them to think while they execute skills. So, Al, any comments related to what Kim has mentioned about what she's doing on Zoom and what you're trying to do out there?
Yeah, well, I've had the opportunity to look at some of the clips that Kim shared on her social media and stuff, and I think it's all fantastic stuff. In terms of what we're doing with the kids, like we've really, I don't think there's anything really that we can claim as our own. I mean, we've really stuck to, we've tried to stick to the USA Hockey American development model. It basically involves a lot of, we'll work on skills, but then a lot of the stuff that we're doing is, how can we minimize the amount of time that those kids stand in line? How can we put them in situations where whatever skill it was that we were talking about or looking at, they actually get to play with it and use it? If a kid does something, unique, how do we encourage that, and how do we recognize it and get the other kids to try stuff? So we do a lot of things where we try to get the kids to, Kim was talking about setup moves. Like we've talked about stuff like that. Like what kind of things can you do to trick this guy, or, what can you do with your feet or your different body parts to try and, misdirect the other person, right? So, again, I don't think it's really anything of ours. I think we're just trying to take some of the ideas that have been put out by Hockey Canada, USA Hockey, and try to implement them in practice. And I think the results are fantastic. Like those clips that I was sharing with you, Wally, with that team that those kids were playing against, they beat them by probably 5 or 7 goals the first time we played them. And I mean, the last game of the season, it wasn't even close. And we're seeing that in our tryouts right now. We've got kids coming in from other programs. We've grown significantly this year, especially. And it's clear in the tryouts, the kids that have skated around cones and practice and things like that, and then the kids that have been doing things our way, it's a pretty significant difference. So.
You mentioned Hockey Canada and USA Hockey, and I don't see the connection between the teaching of skill and what, Kim, you were doing in your Zoom calls, progressively going through building those skills to testing them in a competitive environment. And that's the small areas game environment. I don't see the teaching of skill and the connection coming from Hockey Canada or Hockey USA, but I'm not familiar with it. I really think that the art of everything is the deliberate practice that Kim is doing up the developmental ladder of skills from a very fundamental state to a much more advanced state, sort of like a la Darryl Belfry, and yet being able to do it in a game. So I'm just not sure. I think that's the gap that has to be closed in the game today with coaches in particular. Kim, can you respond?
Yeah, I was just going to say that a lot of the girls I've been teaching over the last 12 months haven't had the opportunity to showcase a lot of it on the ice, but in asking them to send me videos, a lot of them have been sending me these clips, and I'm amazed at how much better they are than the videos they would have sent me last April. Like it's not a little different. Like I'm talking a girl who holds her stick wrong, and you could easily say is a DS or House League player, now looking like an A-level player. And I'm now emailing the parents saying, oh, maybe what team is she trying out for next year? What team is she playing land? Obviously, we're doing it on dry land. But I had 2 videos in particular yesterday of players who I know last season were playing DS or developmental stream, who now are playing double B or A, and we've only been on the ice a handful of times. So I do think if you go on Instagram and you can see all the fancy videos of skill development on and off the ice, it's obviously often quite complex. There is an art to being able to layer it together and blend it, and all the terms that Darryl uses. But I always believe you teach them things that work, and the really fancy stuff they can do on their own time. So I'm not teaching them stuff in my Zoom sessions that I don't think it will work. So if you put 8 pucks down and you're doing all these like figure 8, like that's just not a thing that's going to happen in a game. I'm actually teaching them moves that will absolutely happen in a game, and shot patterns that will absolutely happen in a game. So I think that's a bit of the challenge, is people get caught up in the bells and whistles and, you know, all the cool things you can lay down on the ice and jump over. But you can really engage the players and especially the girls, because you just tell them why you're doing it and why it works, and they'll do it. But it's been quite amazing for me. It has transformed the way I'm going to coach when I get back on the ice, based on the year I've spent off the ice trying to figure out how the heck do you teach a kid to shoot when you're not even in the same time zone as them in some cases, and you can't even really see what they're doing. But it seems to be paying off.
Kim, have you had any contact with Darryl Belfry? Because he's the first skills instructor, you know, sort of, and it's much more than skill. It's application of skill, the morphing of that into the decision making. But have you had any communication with Darryl on that? I know Thursday evenings is his sort of weekly session where a number of people sign up and take the course. And I'm just curious as to where you're at in communication with him and taking some of what he said and trying to play with it.
I think I haven't spoken to him recently. We usually are texting back and forth, but no, I'm really, now that I have to set some curriculum for our organization moving forward, I've taken it upon myself with a slightly more free time to set a more clear curriculum for both Leaside and my total female hockey. So I'm really just trying to work from the foundation and build it up, and using a lot of what Darryl talks about in the book. But really trying to do it, you know, specific to the girls with video clips of females doing it. That's another big piece I've been working on the last couple months, is building a library of being able to showcase a shot in stride with NWHL players doing it, or changing the shot angle with a NCAA player doing it, all female. That's been a big project for me. But in last speaking to Darryl, that was sort of what we arrived upon, is there could be a tremendous power in teaching two females in the female game, you know, by female coaches, using female clips and speaking in such a way that will directly affect, you know, the female game. So instead of saying, oh, you know, when Austin Matthews drags the puck and shoots it, you know, can we say, oh, when, you know, Rebecca Johnson does it, or what have you? So trying to change the language that way. So it's a big project, but I haven't spoken to him specifically, you know, in the last little while. He planted a big seed with me, and it's going to take me a while to make it grow.
Yeah, we certainly enjoyed his book, and I, in regards to that, on Facebook, I noticed he had his daughter demonstrating agility, evasive puck movement at the point to create time and space that, quite frankly, I've never seen before. And I know they were talking on the NHL game that the Flames played, Hannafin's goal off a face-off, dragging the puck to the middle, changing the shot. And that was pretty fundamental movement by Hannafin, resulting in a goal at the NHL level. What he was practicing, Darryl was practicing with his daughter. I'd almost be afraid to even try it. I couldn't teach it, but to try it in a game where that near the blue line and a risk of turnover, I'm one of the old school coaches who say just get it to good ice. But he's done some really, really advanced things that I think the kids today are more capable of doing. The problem is coaches like myself don't dare to let them, and that's where I think the game is going, and it's a good thing. So,
but Wally, I think also not that maybe coaches don't let them, but I think there's still so much fancy stuff that comes before a foundation these days, right? So, you know, and in talking to Darryl, I know I've said this before, you know, I said, I have an advantage because I'm a strength and conditioning coach. So if we talk weight shifts and disassociating upper and lower body and hip turns and all, like, now you're speaking my language. Those are all off ice training terms, right? And so, you know, a lot of the more advanced stuff can't happen without those foundational pieces. So what I'm seeing now is a higher level of skill in the female game, but not built upon a sound foundation. And then you're going to, hit a ceiling in terms of, what translates up to the next level. So like I said, I love all the stuff on Instagram, and I steal some of it on occasion, but it definitely needs a stronger, better built foundation that's reinforced. Because in the gym environment or the strength and conditioning world, every off season you go back to the basics. You go back to basic core. You go back to mobility. You go back to flexibility. In the Olympic cycle, you do it every 4 years. You go back to the beginning. I don't see enough of that in skill training, right? It's just putting more and more and more upon a crappy foundation.
Yeah. To that point, I wanted to mention the podcast you had with Richard. Was that 2 weeks ago? Anyway, in that podcast, and this is the way I read it, I said, you missed out a big part of the basic. You might have alluded to it occasionally, but the one thing I would mention to Richard in the girls' hockey, and I'm not talking Adam and above, I'm talking below. The most basic thing, what do you think I'm getting at, Kim? Can you guess?
Their stick. We talked about their stick length. We talked about it. Richard brought it up.
Yeah, and
it's definitely in there. We did talk about the chicken wing and the hand placement for sure.
And Richard, that to me, getting a right start at that age, when they step on the ice, is in the hands of the course conductor, of the coach one people with the parents in the room to teach them that and the science of it. You can't argue with the importance of the biomechanics of that. So that was the only part. Everything else was just terrific. So anybody else got anything to add related to the skills piece, the teaching piece, how times have changed? Bobby, from your day and my day, I think there's a radical change that's going on before our eyes at the NHL level. The way the game is played, they are doing things and making decisions and executing just incredibly quickly, thinking quickly. And I'm curious, Bob, what do you think of the game today and where it's going and where it might be going?
Well, I love the skill that I see, and I think that's because of the skill development from a young age. I think the game is becoming, well, you watch the Austin Matthews, the Connor McDavids, the Johnny Gaudreaus. I mean, their skill level is off the charts. I mean, this is stuff that we've never seen before. But I will say, Wally, that when I coached, especially the junior level, where you had lots of ice time, we always allowed players, when we were doing like one-on-one drills, we'll say, to be creative. We taught skill, those evasive moves and those types of things, and then encouraged them to do it on the ice in a game situation so that they could transfer it to a game. I don't see a lot of coaches doing that now. When I go out to the rinks, I actually don't like the way I see a lot of practices going. But I think the kids that are getting the proper skill development when they're young, you're seeing it now in the NHL, and I think you're going to see more and more of it. The way these guys can take a puck and shoot it between their legs, and the things they do, it's incredible. Their hand-eye coordination is off the charts, and where it's going to end up, I don't know, but I'll tell you, it's fun watching.
Al Ramsey.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Certainly with the practices that I see around a lot of the rinks here, I think there's a lot of focus on skill and then the gameplay. But I think, like Kim mentioned, and part of what she was talking about the art being to connect the dots. So, like the thought process behind what we've been trying to do. So we've got, for our skating, we've got a guy that comes in once a week with the kids. He's from Lower Stam, so they're getting the skating foundation, and then we're working with. You're partnered up with Power Edge Pro, so they take those skills that they've learned, the skating skills, and we're kind of layering on some additional challenge, like some, overloading. With puck, everything is with pucks, everything is skill based with that. But it kind of, from my perspective, it works well because they spend some time working on their skating before they get to doing that, and then in our practices, we do a lot of these group practices that are focused on skill where there's, up to 50 kids on the ice, and we incorporate a lot of small area games with no standing around. So they're putting those skills to use in context. And with our team practices, what we'll do is we'll take a lot of time to kind of reinforce the concept. So if we're, I phased out the season. So we started out with skating, and then it was puck handling, and then it was passing and stuff like that. So for passing, for example, when we get to a team practice, which we have, maybe 1 out of 4 practices is an actual team practice, instead of, having them do flow drills or something like that, we'll do a teaching drill where, we're teaching them to, bait in a coach to open up some space for somebody else to make a breakout pass. But we're not talking about breakouts. We're just talking about the passes, and we're using coaches to put a little bit of challenge there, but not enough so that the kids are enough that they get the concept of what we're trying to teach. We did the same thing with crossovers, when we were talking about escaping. So we dumped the puck against the boards, have them do a little escape, turn, look over the shoulder to see where the coach was coming from, and then they'd have to, get the coaches to move laterally so that they created space and opened up a hole for themselves to get through. So it's just kind of, I think that's where and maybe that's what you were talking about, Wally, in terms of the gaps with the USA Hockey stuff, because a lot of it from their perspective is to teach things using games and fun, let the game be the teacher. I think where the real art of it is to try and connect the dots, right, between the skills and then, the letting the game be the teacher, right?
Yep, good point. We'll go back to that after we hear from Richard. Tom Malloy. I don't know, Richard, if you're familiar with Tom, but his website is unbelievable, and his time spent in Europe that we have yet to fully appreciate is worth getting back to. Richard, go ahead.
Yeah, I am familiar with Tom. That's Hockey Coaching ABCs, I think, is his website, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've stolen from that fairly regularly, and I'm unabashedly admitting to stealing from it and recommending a lot of stuff on there, particularly his list of 4,000 different variations of small area games. In the associations I've worked with, I have mandated, as in coaches must have a small area game or a low organization game in every practice. Doesn't matter the level. There's been some initial resistance in some places, but once they try it, they see how much it works, because we have to understand how children learn. They learn through play. You watch them in the schoolyard, you watch them in a gymnasium, in school, in phys ed classes. You even watch them in a kindergarten grade 1 class, and how the magic that these teachers of the 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds are able to get kids engaged. They're engaged more when they have to make something using the tools in the classroom than listening to a discussion about how to add 2-digit numbers. So it's really important that we draw a distinction between the deliberate practice that you see a lot of skills instructors do. The good skills instructors are really good. I haven't seen Kim's stuff, but I rather suspect it's really good. And there are an awful lot of skills instructors that are really ordinary and do nothing but drill, which the coaches can do. You can give a chimpanzee a whistle, teach them to exhale into the whistle, and that's what a lot of coaches do. So it's really important we make it clear to coaches that deliberate practice is properly teaching how to do crossover turns, such as what Al is referring to. And Al, I'd like to know what association you're in, where you are, because I'd like to find out the application of the ADM program. So if you could just type it in there to the chat. I'd like to get you on my podcast, as a matter of fact, to talk about that, because I had been in touch with Bob Mancini a few years ago when I had a radio show in Ottawa, and I got him on to talk about the ADM model. However, so deliberate practice, which anybody in sports phys ed and coaching should know about, and the play part of it. And even the older kids want to play, like the junior guys. I remember when I was assistant at Concordia back in the 80s, I used to do stupid little games with these guys inside a zone, and they'd all roll their eyes and go, oh, come on, coach, this is ridiculous. And then when they do it, they were louder and more engaged and yelling at each other and insulting each other during the fun games, like Crazy Puck, which is a favorite, than they would in any drill. And the noise level goes way up because they're having a blast. And you do it with coaches in a coaching clinic, and you can't shut them up. You do a fun game with them, and it doesn't have to be a small area game. It's just a fun, like, not tag, but variations of it. And the noise level is up. And then when you stop them in a coaching clinic, you say, so what'd you think about that? Oh, that was a blast. Would you do it with your kids? Well, no, we have to get through our shooting drills and our one-on-one drills and our puck protection drills. No, that's not how kids learn. How did you learn what you just did? You've got to let the kids play. It's really, really important. There's a time to give them the skill base, and there's a time to just apply it. Just go play.
Jordan?
I would echo much of that, but I just wanted to go back to the piece that deliberate instruction of skill and the skill development. And I think that we're seeing a lot of that, and that players are exceptionally skilled because they've practiced so many things. But where I'm seeing the gap is in the transfer of those skills. And I think that I'm not quite sure the whole reason for it, but part of the reason, it goes back to something that Bob was talking about in the encouragement of creativity. And I think about, if you watch the NHL game right now, where is the creativity? They're playing. Some teams are playing very robotic systems, and it's one of those things that I was thinking about. Was a player that I was working with not this season, but last season, that she was an extremely skilled player. And one day she was playing around in practice, and she decided to do the between the leg shot on goal in the finish of a drill, and she skated by me and said, "You'd kill me if I did that in a game, coach, wouldn't you?" And I said, "No." I said, "Maybe if it's a tie game or a 1-goal game and you're all alone." I said, "But if that's all you got," I said, "absolutely, whatever you can do." And she I could see her eyes light up a little bit. And it was kind of funny. About 6 games later, she did get an opportunity where she took a shot between the legs and she rang it off the crossbar. Well, she was more excited when she got back to the bench about having that attempt than she was of any of the goals she scored that season. So it was giving her the opportunity, the free rein or license to do that. I think is something that we need to really encourage as coaches too, and they have to be able to transfer those skills that they're learning, and being creative and working together with their line mates. It's like Al showing the kids on the bench talking about what they saw with the iPad or that sort of thing. That's absolutely what needs to occur to allow these kids to get to the next levels, and thinking the game differently and seeing the game differently, and it's not just robotic doing the exact same thing over and over and over. So, but no, I think that I would agree with Bob that the skill levels are like we've never seen before. But where I see the gap in it is that I think that the creative side that we may have seen in the game previously isn't quite at the same. I think back to I had the opportunity to watch Detroit practice here in their heyday in Calgary and over at Winsport, and there was Pavel Datsyuk and about 6 other guys that they were in a space that was probably only 10 foot square, and 1 puck. And their goal was to try and stick handle through all the players back and forth as many times as they could. And when you stole the puck, well, you got to do it. And these guys they're getting paid millions of dollars, but what are they doing? They're playing a fun little small area game against each other, against some of the best players in the world, and they are the best players in the world because of it. So
Jordan, I always encourage my players in practice to challenge themselves. So I was very structured defensively, but I wanted my players to be very creative offensively. And so during practice or even before practice, it was always talked about things that they should be trying to do, trying to create, and it was encouraged. And we'd even set goals sometimes in games to score a goal in a particular way, which was a creative way of scoring it, like whether it was off an entry or off of individual deke or whatever, offensive concept, whatever it was. But I always in practice would encourage, when we were doing something, I would be saying it out loud to do whatever it was, and it allowed the players to be creative. And I think if you go back and look at the teams I've coached, our goal scoring was the highest always, and our goals against was the lowest. But our guys had fun. In practice, they were allowed to create. And I see, when I watch the NHL now, I think that you have to win or you don't have a job, right? So it's so structured that players are not being creative. And I see a few coaches are trying to loosen the rein there a little bit and letting guys be more creative. But I think the game has to be played more like the old Edmonton Oilers used to play it, right? And then they would tighten up when playoffs come. But boy, they had fun. And I think everybody plays the game because it's fun. I don't care if you're making $5 a week or $5 million a week, right? These guys play because it's fun, and you got to let them have fun. And practice is a place you can have fun. You have to be working, but it's got to be encouraged that they go out there and they do the things that they're capable of doing. They have to create. They have to challenge themselves. It's no different than a defenseman challenging a forward and gapping up, right? The forward's got to learn to challenge the defenseman too, read what he gives them and take what he gives them and be creative and just do whatever. Like go to open ice, move the puck, skate. It's just all these little things that guys want to do that you have to let them do, and you have to encourage it. And when I go and watch practices of younger teams, I see coaches discouraging that, and it really irks me. They do a drill, it's a flow drill. They don't correct, they don't encourage. I don't know. I think somewhere we're missing the boat here with letting the kids have fun and enjoy the game and learning the game by just playing it.
Bob, I just wanted to give Tom a chance. His hand is up. I would have to say the master of letting the game teach is what Tom's area is. So Tom, go ahead.
Well, on my site, I have this quick links place, and I do a series of how you would teach like a one-on-one or this sort of thing. And there's drills and games and transition games, and then tournaments, and you have tournaments. So Horst Wine is the guy that developed the program in Barcelona and all kinds of places. And the first thing he does is he creates a need to know with young kids. So they'll play a game and maybe they can only use their left foot, but they haven't practiced it. And they play games, and then, now you've created a need to know. The kids are struggling, of course, because they've never done it. And then he has what he calls corrective exercises. And they do some drills, to learn how to do it. Then they go back, to playing that game now using their left foot, but now they have a little bit of technique. And that's the basic of how I think the game should be taught. I taught phys ed for a zillion years, and mostly in junior high, but with elementary kids and all this. And when I do my camp in Jasper, we have 15 ice times in a week, and they have 3 ice times in a day, 1 hour ice times. And we alternate between 2 skating and 1 hockey the different days. And we play little games all the time, but we divide the kids into, the ability groups, because we have all age groups there. And they'll play a game and do the same thing. And they play a game, they have to do something. And then in that little group, they practice, a technique. And then they go back to playing the game. And then we'll play King's Court tournaments where they'll play games. Maybe there are different rules at each place, or maybe the same rule, or maybe there's might be a ring or a ball, or different things that they have to use at all the different stations. And the game is kind of the key of everything. Everything comes from the game because we're teaching a game. We're not teaching the skills. We're teaching the skills to be used within a game. And even in our program that I did with Johanny, it goes through everything. The games, you teach kids the habits and habits as well when they're little kids, like facing the puck. There's a game, you just face the puck. And that's all the coach looks for. Or maybe their stick is on the ice all the time, or they have to take 3 strides, and they're learning that as a 6-year-old, and as well as learning the skills. And that's how I believe. And what I've seen, these great coaches like Johanny, who's an icon in Finland, or Vladimir Yursinov, who is kind of the key guy in all of Russia, and he developed all those guys that are in the NHL right now. And I got to coach with him in Salzburg as well. That's the philosophy that I believe that we should have coaching. So it's a combination of the game to drills, and the advancement of drills is transition games and tournaments and all these sort of things. So it's quite a different way of coaching than Hockey Canada does or whatever. But it's, in my experience, is what works best.
So Tom, I agree with you, but how do you sell that to the hockey organizations and get them to buy in?
Oh, Bob, it's really hard to sell because people want flow drills, right?
Exactly.
Even in my site, when I put on things, I'll put on stuff like that, and then I'll put on a flow drill, and there's 3 times more people that do the flow drill because it looks good for parents. The kids flying around the ice like this, totally unopposed, like how many total breakaways do you get in a season? Shooting unopposed and this kind of thing, but that's what people like. And,
that's what I'm saying, Tom, and I don't know how we get, when you go to minor hockey practices and you see the parents have to drive the kids, so they stay to watch, right?
Yeah.
And that's what they want to see, and they wondering what the hell are you doing when you're doing a small area drill, and their kids are just having fun. Well, they're not learning to play hockey according to the parents. So how do we get that sold to associations and parents that they have to start from the basics, foundations, and work up? And it never changes right the way through. I mean, you still gotta, as we're talking about Detroit Red Wings, 10 guys in a small area.
I was at that practice, and I have the video of it. It's surprising you all.
Bob, that's why we're on this call. We know that. We totally understand that. That's why we have this group attempting to influence the game in a good way to make it better. Richard in particular has gone through the bandwagon as long as I have, and we're banging our head against the wall. And fortunately, we have people like Al and Kim on board. They are young and they're in the trenches, coaches, in quotation marks, getting this. That's really important.
Can I share, Wally, can I share Danny Heatley's development? I had Danny, I was coaching, his dad helped me coach one year at SAIT in the 80s. And the first time Danny ever went on the ice, he stepped on the ice. I gave him a free hockey school, so Murray took it for sure. And he fell down, he cried. And he said, I don't want to play hockey. And then what happened with Danny, he wasn't a great skater, but he was good. And we let him play with us on Sunday mornings because he passed the puck. And most kids, when they play, they just, hang on to the puck forever. Nobody wants to play with him. But he played every Sunday morning with us for years. And then when he got to about 14, 15, and we also play all summer on Tuesday nights, we call it popcorn hockey because we go and have beer and popcorn after. He played that all the time. And then he got too good for us. So what we said is, okay, you have to have 2 assists for every goal you score. So, that helped him, see the ice and all this kind of stuff. And he did that for, I don't know. He was still doing that when he was playing at Wisconsin, coming and play with us. And, but it was the game, the key thing with Danny is he played the game, and he played, there were a lot of guys that were pretty good players in our group. And and he just played the game better. And I remember watching him play in the World Juniors, and Canada wasn't very good in the 90s there. And he would pass the puck and never get it back. It was just pulling my hair out watching it, because we didn't play the game very well at that point. And, but he learned to play the game by playing the game. And so I'll shut up now, but I just wanted to share that.
Al, then Kim.
From our side with the little kids, I think you plant the seed for, can you hear? Yeah. I think you plant the seed in practice, right? So you let them try different things, you play, you make it about having fun and encourage their creativity in the practice. But I think I honestly, like with the youth, at least at our level, I think you either reinforce it in the games or you kill it in the games. And, for us, like an 8U game, like honestly, I mean, as long as the kids are competing, what does it matter if they win, really? From our perspective, like as long as we're teaching them to compete, that's more important than whether we actually win the game. So if a kid tries something and, gets the puck taken from them and the other team scores, is it really that big a deal? And, I think a lot of people's first instinct is to correct that mistake, right? But, it may be a situation where the kid had the right idea, but the execution wasn't there because they're 8, right? And I've seen this lots and lots of times. Actually, I had one kid one time, because we're using the iPad, this was a few years ago when I first started using it. We were playing a game and, the kid made a bad pass to somebody else and whatever. He tried to make a move and made a bad pass. And I was showing it and I was saying, well, here's what you're seeing. Maybe you could try, passing this guy. And he's like, well, I did try to pass it then. And I went back and I looked and I totally missed it. But he just, he's a little kid. He didn't execute it properly. He saw what he should do, but then he actually did something else because the execution wasn't there, right? So we had a little conversation about that, and that was good. And that's one of the things that kind of started encouraging me to ask the question as opposed to telling them. It's just that one little thing, because you don't know sometimes what they're thinking. We had another kid this season early on where he tried to do something really creative, but he happened to do it right in front of our own net. And somebody took the puck off him and scored a goal, immediately. And I bit my tongue. I was saying it, I was watching this, and it actually happened to be my own son. And I just kind of bit my tongue, and he came off and said, oh, pat him on the back, no big deal. We'll get it back, that kind of thing. And I've seen him now do that same move and beat players probably 20 times over the course of the season, where he's doing the same thing, and it's a transition from backwards to forwards, and he's putting the puck underneath their stick and making a breakout pass, which I could have killed in a second if I would have got on his case the first time it happened, right? So I think it's a lot of how we as coaches, especially at the little kids, like how we treat the games and how we react to certain situations, because they all make a lot of mistakes, and sometimes we don't know what their intent was, and sometimes that mistake could actually have been something that we would want to encourage.
Al, thanks very much. I got another story that I'm not going to relate at High Performance in the summer in Alberta, where a kid did a toe drag on a breakout, allowing them to tie the game. And it was one of those high-risk things at a high performance camp where his creativity at that moment wasn't appropriate. Kim, go ahead.
Well, I just want to circle back about, sort of that buy-in, and Bob was alluding to it earlier, right? Is that the parents have an expectation of a certain level of sweat or flow drill, or I think Darryl calls it the sweat test, right? So they come to a practice and there's things they, remember from when they played or what they think it's supposed to look like. And I think it's interesting, as tied in with what Al just said about making mistakes and taking risk and being creative. And like, since when were coaches not allowed to do that? I am a risk taker as a coach. I am creative as a coach. I am willing to try different things. I am willing to fail miserably. And so it's ironic, right, that now, in the sort of newish way of teaching, we want our players to do it, but I've got to run the same 6 drills all year, right? And I actually probably could do that and be creative to tweak it all. But, I do think it's funny, I think it also goes back to how you carry yourself as a professional coach and the way you approach a practice, right? So, I go back about, Matt used to be a lawyer. I mean, all I know about lawyering is like what I see on Netflix. My mom's a lawyer. I don't know what she actually does every day, right? But, the parents perceive, they sit in the stands, they know what a hockey coach does every day, right? Like they think when I run practice, that's actually where all the work is, where we all know 90% of the work happened before I even stepped on the ice to run the practice. But I think you have to communicate that stuff clearly. This is why we're doing it. If they have a problem with a lack of flow drills, then you have to explain it. And you probably are explaining that before the season ever starts. I guess I have a luxury now in junior. You don't get a lot of parents watching. They either drop their kid off and, there's a lot of restaurants and bars around our rink, we'll just say. So the parents may go somewhere else why their daughter's on the ice, but a lot of my players drive themselves. But I did have an incident last year when I was coaching midget AA. We had a practice in a rink that was kind of off the beaten path. And we went in there and there were all these parents watching practice. It had been years since I'd had any parents watching me run a practice. I was like, oh, this is kind of odd. What are all these people doing here? Actually watching me run the show. So I don't mean to dismiss it, but I do think it comes down to how you communicate what it is that you're trying to do. But I do think you have to be willing, if we're going to allow our players to make mistakes and be creative and take risks, then we also should be willing to do the same thing and think outside the box. And if it doesn't cut both ways, then, how could we possibly ask our player to do it? Or how could we demonize a player for toe dragging in front of their net? Right? I don't know. And I think if you sold it like that to the parents, it would probably go over relatively well.
Kim, and in that regard, I think everybody here, we get it. And Richard, our biggest concern, and I don't know that Kim and Al are delivering coaching clinics yet, but that's the part of coaching education, to be able to teach them the right ingredients to being a coach. That means the teaching element, the hockey sense element, the difference between random and deliberate practice, and the right stuff, the right amount, the right time of doing things. And we're not providing them. There are a couple of very serious fundamental gaps in their coach education. So we can fret all we want about what's going on. And I think you and I, Richard, have fretted more than anybody because we were the ones doing the programs, and in particular, designing the programs in our relative areas. And I worked with Hockey Canada at the time that we did it the right way. And I think that coach education piece, in hockey in particular, they've turned over to the CAC and granted certification with the hockey program, some of the elements, without teaching coaches how to coach and how to teach in particular. So it relates to that. Go ahead, Rich.
I agree with you. There's a huge piece at the minor hockey level that has never properly been addressed. That we meaning the all-encompassing leaders of the game, have done a really lousy job at. We do not educate the parents. We just do not. You get your team and away you go. If there's a problem, then the association steps in. If there's a problem with your junior team, the owner steps in, the general manager steps in. But we don't educate the parents at all about what is deliberate instruction, what is learn through play, what are small area games and why do they work. If we're going to rely on Tom Rennie's Tom Talks, if we're going to rely on messaging, PDAs from Hockey Canada to educate parents, that's bombed. It's bombed for 30 years. The onus is on the people who are the leaders of the game, not just in coaching clinics, which I agree with you, Wally. There's a ton of stuff we should be doing more of and better of, but we really do need to sit down with parents, whether it's in the Zoom world or however, and educate them and walk them through, here's what the proper messaging is about with our coaches. Here's how we're mentoring our coaches. Here's the way we're instructing our coaches. Here's what happens with small area games. Here's why you're not going to see flow drills among the 11-year-olds, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. If we don't the parents all know what the school system is about because they've all been through it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
But they don't know what the hockey world is about, even though they think they do.
Yeah. And I've had this discussion with Dan Morrow recently. And you know Dan, Richard, he's the one that did the mission statement exercise.
He's still alive?
He's still alive, and he's
Where
going to
is
get
he?
back into coaching when he retires in Calgary, working with Enbridge. But Dan, who invented the mission statement exercise that I'm hoping to do with you, the one thing he's learned, you can talk about, we use the term we blame Hockey Canada. Who's responsible? I believe the only mechanism, and Dan agrees with me, is the coach must educate the parent. And so Dan's, when he's done the mission statement, which is the perspective of why you're coaching, why you're parenting, and why you're a part of this team, what your organization wants to do, he's shared one thing to me that is new. And Dominic Pittis, who's coaching with the Flames Oregon farm team, coaching his daughters in Stockton, discovered the same thing. And what Dan advocates is get out of the dressing room at the end of every game and go and talk to parents. And Dominic Pittis, his decision is you got to get the coaches to ask, the parents to ask you questions. They've got to know why you're doing what you're doing. So you want more questions from them to explain what you're doing. And you'll have buy-in that way. That's Dan's statement. And Dominic's statement is the inability of coaches to deal with what their concerns are and say, well, we're doing this in this way, explaining it in a rational fashion. And if you've done it with the mission statement exercise, you will have agreement. But if you don't establish respect and trust, which was a big part of Morris's talk last week, respect and trust with the parents, with the players as a coach at any level. I mean, his ability to do that, he feels it's the one thing he would add to his toolbox with the mission statement. Because if you don't have that, the score clock overrules, the outcome overrules, the emotions overrule. Adults ruin the game. So I think there is a solution out there. It's just a matter of getting the powers to be to implement it in a way that was actually in place a long time ago. So that's why this group exists, Richard. That's why we're having these conversations. So anybody else, anything to add on the debate? I think the big thing I'm getting out of it is we're all in different communities. Some of us are more involved. Some of us are less involved. Kim and Al, you're in the trenches. So
I think it's an interesting idea about coming up and speaking to the parents right after a game. I would probably argue one might want to enact the 24-hour rule, if for better or for worse. You win big, you lose big, in girls hockey, tie another game 0-0. It might not be the best use of my time, but I don't mean that in a negative. I have no problem talking to parents, but I know I'm not their friend. We're not friends, just like I'm not friends with the players. But what I've always done is I send an email every Monday outlining the plan for the week. I do a little recap over the weekend. Hey, we played 2 great games. I thought a forecheck did really well, blah, 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 blah. And that happens every single Monday all season long. They know when it's coming. I tell them I'll get it to them before noon, although I do use the caveat. I do use my children as an excuse occasionally and don't get it out till 2. But they expect that communication. My players expect it. I think once in 13 years, I forgot to send the email, and I instantly got 17 emails like, oh, what's the schedule for the week? What's happening? So you train them. But I think that allows you a bit of a buffer, as opposed to going right up the stairs, for me after a game and saying, hey, how's everyone doing? No, inevitably I'm going to run into some of the parents, and if they really wanted to offer up their opinion, but often the parents don't. And I think a lot of the reason the parents don't offer up their opinion to me is that I've trained them is not the correct term, but they know that they're going to get the little synopsis from me on Monday. They're going to get the schedule for the week. I have a quote of the week. There's a lot of different stuff that we put in that weekly email, that, if I had to, when I speak to the coaches that I'm developing here at Leaside, that's the number one piece of advice I give them, is to send out a weekly email of the schedule and a little recap and what's coming up. And, and it also gives the opportunity to say, hey, and thanks to my assistant coach, Sally, for doing that great job running the, whatever at the fundraiser, or thanks to the parents. For, like, it allows you in writing to put something on paper that, the kids can see, the parents. I send it to all the players and all the parents or guardians. Maybe in the case of our team, we have some kids who bill it. So everybody's seeing the exact same message. And I think that's what's most powerful, is that there's no confusion. There's no one saying, oh, well, when you talk to Richard over there in the hallway, that's not what I heard you say, right? It's very direct, clear, printable, as I always like to say. They can print it out, but it's in writing, and I think that's powerful nowadays.
What I'm referring to is a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, and sometimes you give parents too much information, and they'll come right back at you, saying that, well, you said you were going to be teaching passing this week and you haven't done it. I'm not talking about that kind of world. I'm referring to, particularly with the kids 10 and under, making it very clear to parents what it is, showing them through video, through slides and whatnot, showing them what programs are involved and why their kids are being shown certain things a certain way. We don't do any of that. It's left to the coaches. And this is a leadership vacuum with the branches, with Hockey Canada, and with associations. They do a really lousy job of educating parents. As a parent, and then we're all parents, I think, we want to know what kind of a program our kids are getting into. Doesn't matter whether it's dance, gymnastics, hockey, piano. We want to know what it is that's being taught and the approach that's being used. And as long as you're sort of following that, then we're good. We know what's going on in the school system. We know what their qualifications are. But in hockey, we don't share anything. Nothing.
Yeah. I just got to interject here on that, because Richard, since 1990 and the mission statement, until you do the exercise, you won't appreciate what I'm saying.
Yeah, I know what you mean, though.
I saw you nod your head and sideways, and it's because of that reaction. It's not why. It's not the skills you're teaching and what you're doing at what point in time. It's why you're doing it.
Right.
And if they appreciate the why of what we're here for, which is the life skills you're going to learn, trying to learn and be the best you can be, then you can go out in the hallway and talk to kids, because that's where you're coming from. It isn't the score clock, the result. It's not the X's and O's, which they don't understand, and you're willing to share with them if you can. It's the mission and the purpose of the entire experience. And I don't care if it's junior hockey on the male or female side. On the male side, major junior is one thing. On the junior A side, it's another. It's a scholarship. That's sort of the goal for the junior A side. But until you know why you're doing what you're doing, it's no use explaining it and justifying it to anybody, because anything you do won't be appreciated and be accepted. So create trust and belief, whatever way you can, and it may work. Who knows? I'm not going to be around long enough to find out.
Well, I think, Wally, every time we have this kind of conversation, I think it's very valuable. I think to myself, don't we talk about this stuff before we even pick the kid for our team? Like, are you not having these types of conversations? Like, to me, that's shocking because that's always the way I've approached it, right? But I think I've saved myself a lot of headache over the years by communicating those types of things before I even, select a player. First of all, I never select a player without meeting them in person with their parent or guardian. I would never just have the kid in the room, and I certainly would never just have the parents in the room, right? And you're being very, this is my type, this is the program we run, right? This is what we do. It's part of the sales pitch before the player commits to your team. And give them the full sales pitch and say, you're either in or you're out, but I can tell you this is what you're getting. This is what you should expect, right? If they then check the box and say, yes, we'd love to be there, that's great. Perfect. And that's the first piece of buy-in you have. I think if you're not confident enough as a coach to deliver that type of message when you're still recruiting the player, then you're setting yourself up for failure. Now you get a second shot at it when you do, your tryout meeting or your initial meeting with the team and say, hey, hi everybody, nice to meet the parents and the kids. You do it with everybody in the room and you set out expectations and all those sorts of things again. And then, perhaps you do it again at training camp and the mission statement exercise and all. Like, I know I've gone wrong, and I know you've got parents who sometimes try to take the reins, but I just think as coaches, we have to stop blaming the parents and saying, oh, they did this and they did this. And I think, well, what did you do to prepare yourself so that if that happened, you said, remember back in when we spoke in the dressing room before you signed up your daughter for this team, what we discussed in there, right? Like, it's a bit shocking to me. And again, I see it all the time, but it seems so simple to set those expectations early
Kim,
on.
You're recruiting. You're already at a level where you have to do what you have to do, the way you do it.
Right.
I'm not talking about the recruiting phase of hockey. This is the way we operate. I'm saying minor hockey, the ethical manner of operation is going to make it easier coming to you. Because right now, some of the players that aren't coming to you because they're looking for a better opportunity to get double the ice time are going to be lacking the necessary life skills that they would be taught being brought up properly. So I'm talking minor hockey here. And I'm not talking beginning. I'm talking about your level before your competitive level. Before they get to that they're brought up in a way where they understand the importance and the value of that and appreciate it. Then going out in the hallway and meeting them is a very comfortable thing when you've had the right start. And you won't know until we do it at Coach 1, Coach 2, and Development 1. And you're talking about HP levels of coaching here and competitive levels with your junior teams and in your high-level teams. So I understand what you're saying, and it's the same debate we've had for quite a while. Rick Puttick has mentioned that code of conduct. He lays out all the facts, the way it's going to be delivered, and it totally works for him. And he can do it, and you can do it. And we're talking about all the coaches that are trying to learn to do this. So I'm just hoping to give them a tool, and it was in place formally many years ago, and I don't need to talk about it anymore. So Richard, thank you very much for coming on, and hopefully we'll get together with Dean Holden and do that statement. He's got some family problems on now, but thanks very much, Richard, for joining us. Okay. Kim, any response there? Because you're in a real good position at Lee's side where you're looking after your level, the highest level, and the ones below you. And that's where problems, and I'm talking seeing problems occur at novice 7.
Yeah, well, again, to me, it's about having, best practices in place, and, we'll do the mission statement exercise with everybody, and I'll talk to the coaches and, create resources they can use to guide themselves through it. But, and we all know you can lead the horse to water, you can't make him drink. But the nice thing for me now is, now that I've selected all these coaches, we haven't selected our U9, U7 yet, or our house league coaches. Those don't get selected, obviously, till the teams are made. But on the competitive side, I've selected 30 coaches now. And they know my expectations. And while I haven't given them anything specific that they have to deliver yet, they've certainly had communications with me about how I'm going to operate and what my expectations are of them, and their expectations can be of me. So, I've already, I guess, cut that off at the pass. But no, it'll be a very interesting year to finally be able to enact some of this stuff and see how it carries over. But it is, and I know Richard's taking on a very similar role to me at Whitby. There's a tremendous value to even having someone in a role like this. By the mere fact that I exist at the association I'm at says a lot about the association itself, to recognize the need for that. And it also, none of these coaches have ever had someone like that sort of overseeing everything. So they're excited about that opportunity. So there's a lot of newness that is, to my advantage in this first year of enacting it next year, to say, hey, this is something that should be done, and here's the way we're going to do it. I think the true test will be 3 or 4 years from now. Once you've tried some things and failed at some things and try to actually figure out what works. But I think I get the benefit of a honeymoon period in year one, because I haven't done it before. So I can feign a little bit of ignorance, at least in the beginning. But yeah, I don't take it lightly. It's a tremendous opportunity. And there'll be a lot of learning that'll go along with it. But even in talking to parents who've been, disgruntled with the way teams have been picked thus far for next season and those types of things, the fact that I exist takes the load off the coach sometimes. They can call me and say, hey, Kim, what was the process for picking teams this year? So it's not them attacking the coach and saying, why didn't you take my daughter? They come to me and say, well, are we not having tryouts? Are we having tryouts? Are coaches allowed to do this? So it's a lot of clarification in processes that's helpful as well. So, I don't think every association's in the position to have a me or have a Richard, but it does certainly help in terms of establishing credibility and buy-in just by the fact that we exist.
Richard, Al, can you comment on that? Kim's in a position, a hired, paid position, an authoritative position, and to be in control of the atmosphere. Now, your position is a volunteer position with, your child, and Kim's girls are growing up and playing hockey now too. So, but you don't have the same, I don't know if clout is the right word, but how do you see the challenges ahead of you in view of what we've talked about?
Well, I think everything Kim just said is awesome. I think it's great that they're doing that. I mean, for us, so we do have a structure, even though it's volunteer, we've got a similar structure to that, right? So, myself as the hockey director and coaching director, we'll have a coaches meeting. This year we'll probably have one in the springtime. At this point, normally we don't have it until August. But the way we've run those is to give an overview of what we're all about, what we're going to do. Here's what we're doing. Here's why. And then we've got a director at each level who then, runs a breakout session with all the coaches at that level and all the assistant coaches. And they'll talk about what the season's going to look like, what they're going to focus on, how it's going to go, how's everybody's going to work together. And it's been usually helpful. It's a lot of time. It's a lot of volunteer hours. So I don't know that that's something that, you see everywhere. We're really lucky that we've got a lot of people that are putting in a lot of time and effort, on a volunteer basis. So, but it's huge. To get everybody aligned like that is huge. And, from our side on the parent stuff, we started about 4 years ago doing a parent presentation on day one of Learn to Play. So all these guys came in as parents initially, and they've all gotten that as part of their start. And that parent presentation on day one, it actually happens while the kids are on the ice, so that the parents are not sitting in the rink, they're actually up in a meeting room watching the presentation. And it covers everything from our mission statement to sports parenting to skill development to stick length it's a good solid hour. A lot of it focuses on cross ice, because that was an area when I first joined that there was a lot of resistance to what USA Hockey was trying to do with the cross ice stuff. So we get into a lot of, the whys behind that. And not just the numbers, because USA Hockey's done a really good job of promoting like the quantitative benefits in terms of like additional touches, additional shot attempts, and all that. They got some great posters and stuff, but what they don't talk about is how the cross ice game translates into kids learning the patterns of the game and learning how to actually play. So we get into that a little bit. And again, like that happens on day one for everybody, first day, before they even get into competitive mite hockey, right? This is like from our development program is what we call it. But that's been huge, you know, and it kind of sets the expectation, and then we'll have those through the year. Usually mid-year we'll have another reconnect, and the parents, you know, the coaches, they do their thing with the parents as well. But yeah, I think the more you can get people aligned, the better, and that's been one of the keys to what we've been trying to do.
Hell, I call that right start. Learn to play level. First time they're on the ice, the first time their kids are playing, they understand why they're going to school.
Yeah, if you have to, it's been huge, absolutely huge. We started about 4 years ago, and it's just been hugely beneficial.
And moving forward, going to Adam and then going to Pee Wee, are you able to sustain this continuity without formal certification? You do it yourself there, but are they required to take a Coach 1 and Coach 2 and a Coach Development 1 program where they can be re-educated on the merits of the direction you're going? Lost your voice there, go ahead. I'm having trouble hearing you, Al. Still am. Not hearing you.
I think your microphone's off.
Well, if we can't hear you, Al, we'd sure love to hear it, but you're in a position of making things happen. So anybody else? Rick, you've been there longer than most of us coaching in the trenches at every level, and now you're mentoring as well. Any comments on? We've had this conversation a few times on many of the sessions, and I'm sure that when Tim gets on, we'll get back to the X's and O's, and there's so much more exciting, but I think this is really important.
Well,
Rich?
My thing, Wally, as we've talked before, has been, I think the strength of it has been getting out in front of the problems. I think most coaches coming in, either they don't know what kind of grief they're going to get from the parent side of things, or if they do know, they don't take any action, proactive action to address it. They just hope to be able to duck and weave around it and deal with the problems as they arise. My process has been predicated upon getting it up front and taking control of the situation. The best defense is a good offense, if you will. Setting the expectations, the boundaries, getting the understandings from day one as to how things were going to be handled, and probably the biggest shortcoming out of that from my more recent education with this group in particular is that I probably could have explained in more detail some of the things as opposed to just overviewing it and asking to be left alone and find out what the results are going to be. The results have always been good. One of my tenets has been when players don't want to come back and play for me, I know I've spent my best before date, and I'm still waiting for that to happen. So, and what Kim does, what Al's talking about, all falls into that. What Richard was talking about educating parents, again, I agree with that. We don't, as a minor hockey group overall, don't do enough with the parents to help them understand what the process is.
Good stuff. Well, We've been going for 2 hours and 4 minutes. I really enjoy the time. For those of you that may not know, Tim Bothwell, he's in Denmark on the way back to Canada, getting ready for the World Championships. He mentioned he was going to try to get on, depending on his schedule with Team Denmark, but he's certainly keeping in the loop and responding to the stuff that we're sharing. Did anybody have a chance? I'm sort of finishing editing up Morris's stuff, and I'm glad we got to talk about the nicknames and the use of them today. But any other thoughts on Morris's presentation last week and where he was going and what we might take out of it? Anybody? Bobby?
No, I think I thought he was on point on most of his stuff. I was in a little bit disagreement on what he thought was acceptable for nicknames, and I know that within groups it can be accepted where from the outside it looks like maybe it's not kosher. But I thought his points were well taken. I thought he was on point. I think for a lot of the younger coaches, there was a lot of good information in there for them.
Do you think his information was too advanced for most coaches, his communication piece?
I think it was a little bit too advanced for probably Bantam and under, I would think.
Yeah.
I would think, yeah. You know, I think a lot of the things we talk about here, Wally, are fairly advanced. I mean, what's the target audience here? I mean, with what Kim was just saying, she's now being paid to implement a program. It sounds like to me. I don't really know exactly what she's doing, but she's going to find out that she has to answer to people now. She better be very convinced about what she's doing and what it's right. But when she has to answer to some other people about it, the situation may change. I mean, you've been there, I've been there. I mean, what the owners or the operators think one day may not necessarily be the same the next day, right? So if she's having success early, and hopefully she does, it's going to go well for her. If she's not, she's going to have a lot of explaining to do, and we know how that can go, right? It's just but we do have to get the message out to younger coaches as to what they're doing, why they're coaching, and how they go about it. I don't want to speak for Tom, but I know when Tom was working with one of the associations, when I was mentoring coaches, I know there was unhappy parents there because of the way he practiced. His practices to me were perfect, but the parents didn't see it that way, right? So we need to get that message out somehow to parents as to what proper practice is for what age groups. And a lot of the things that Tom was doing, I think they do right up to the NHL level. I mean, good coaches do it. So, but parents don't see that. All they see is the score at the end of the game. And I think that's a huge message we need to get out, that it's not all about winning. I mean, we all want to win, but that's not the purpose, especially at the minor hockey league level. It's about teaching kids to compete, to be responsible, to trust. I mean, all these life skills. And I think that too many parents don't see the benefits of the life skills that the kids are learning. And I think good coaches have to relate life skills to what they're doing in practice and in games. And I don't know where that message has gone missing. I know that from the time I started coaching, I don't know if a lot of the stuff just come naturally to me or what, but I mean, that's what the game is about. It's about learning to play the game, have fun, learn to compete, learn life skills, all those things that are going to carry you through life, relationships, communication, all of those things. And we've got to get that message to the parents, and whether that's through parent meetings on a regular basis with the coaches, with the associations. I mean, it's got to get out there. And I think we've done I don't know if we've done a poor job of it, or we just haven't done a job where it's been consistent.
Well, I don't think any of that's changed, Bob, over the years. I mean, I remember back in the 80s when the initiation program was first brought in, if anybody online remembers that, and I think you probably do. And I was head of our minor hockey association, and I was in favor of the concept, and we had a heck of a battle, or worse, to try and get that installed. And I know that was pretty much across the board from talking to other minor hockey groups at the time. And it's carried on forward right now into the small games and the novice program on the half ice. It's not real hockey is this phrase that always comes forward. And that battle has literally been going on for 40 years in my existence in the sport. And I'm not sure how you correct that. But I agree with you.
Well, I guess you got
the parents need to understand something different than what they currently understand. Hearing your comments about Tom's practices years ago, I can well relate to that. And anytime somebody's innovating in the hockey rink, they get a lot of spectators. Excuse me, for the most part, naysayers, not people that are there to see what's new or what could be being done different. They're there to know what's going wrong and to comment on it negatively. It's an unfortunate set of circumstances, but it's what we live with today and have done for quite some time.
Well, I guess maybe the part of the answer is you've got to satisfy yourself as a coach and the needs of the players, and maybe satisfy the parents a little bit with something that you do in practice as well, so that it keeps them on your side.
I think, yeah, if I can jump in there, Bob, I think the other thing is that whatever you're doing better have results, positive results attached to it that you can hang on later and say, this is why we did this.
Well, I agree with you 100%.
Well, we're back to square one, 1990.
Exactly.
And,
well, I'd like to chirp in here too, because my thing mentioned that was with the Royals, and there was two parents there. One now is at Notre Dame, head of the girls program. Two parents there that thought that they knew everything about everything, and their view was you needed to bag skate a lot. And the one guy the next year became the skills coach for the whole Royals, and he would get the kids on for 75 minutes and go around the middle circle, like all kinds of different things. Like the ice was almost down to the cement. And then he'd do the same thing with the next group. So now the kids can't carry the puck because they're skating in like a plowed field, and this kind of stuff. And they were really powerful people there because they, the guy wouldn't play the player parent game or anything like this, but he had, and they didn't come to our team party or anything like this. And then, they basically just undermined, and that it doesn't matter what you do with some people. And what we did that year, like the Bantam year, I coached a kid. We took this kid named Jack McNaughton, and he was just learning to play goal. And he wasn't very good, like he was athletic, but he wasn't very good because he was lost in his net and diving all over. He hadn't really been coached. And we said, like, we think he can be a good goalie. Goalies weren't very good that year. And we wanted him to play in that top 40 game. And the other coaches said, well, we don't think he's good enough, but if you agree, you'll take him because they won't allow you to cut him twice, right? That, he'll play on your team. And he did. And I had him, and then the other goalie was way worse. So we had a team that we basically had to outshoot the other team 40-20 to tie 2-2 or whatever, because, or probably 6-6, because my goalies were horrendous, but we played good hockey. Well, Jack got coaching, and he's been the hitman goalie for the last 3 years. So anyways, there's just some people you can't. They got their view, and it doesn't matter what you do. But I was going through stuff. The other day I was thinking of, since 2000, my teams have won 7 provincial golds, 4 provincial silvers, and 3 bronze. So it's worked pretty good. So sometimes you just have to say that parent just doesn't know what the hell they're talking about. But that's what you got to live with minor hockey. That's why I really like coaching at the college level. They just fire you if they don't like you.
Well, yeah.
Well, we're back to square one again. And, I guess I could ask all of you the question, well, what can you do about it? And that's the question. And that's the solution lies in the questions you ask to get the answers you want. And obviously, it's about leadership, adults. And I believe that coaches, their intentions can be guided well, and they can be given the tools to do things the right way. And recruiting good parents to serve on boards that understand the value of the experience versus the outcome. So I firmly believe that. I'm going to go to my grave advocating for that. I've got a few people to go through. If this was done when it should have been done, code of ethics would have been more properly accepted, more properly delivered, rather than something that is brushed over, ignored, not realized how important and useful it can be. So I'm looking forward to continuing this battle. And listen, if any of you got the playoff, it's like the playoffs are on now in the NHL. Tom, what'd you think of the Flames last night?
I really like the way they play right now. I think that Sutter got some time to, really, he got about 5 practices, and I think that really helped. And then he put the lines together so you don't have play enders playing with Johnny Gaudreau and stuff like that. He's got skill guys playing with skill guys, and he's got, he's going with 4 lines. I really like the way they played. Just they're the closest players on the puck all the time. And I know that other guy, he did a lot of, whatever contain, not pressure. And I really like the way they're playing right now. So.
And I thought they hung on to the puck a lot better last night offensively too. Wasn't nearly as much dump and chase as what they'd been doing.
Well, yeah. Well, Levo and that number 24, and that they're actually making some plays instead of getting rid of the thing all the time.
Yeah, exactly. No, I agree. I think that's the best game I've seen the Flames play in a number of years, to be honest with you.
Yeah, now they only have to win the next 15 and they're in.
Yeah, they better hope Markstrom can keep playing the way he is.
Yeah, he was really having trouble with rebounds.
Yeah, show me a good goalie, I'll show you a good coach, Tom.
Well, that's right.
The one thing that impresses me with Sutter, and it's sort of the enigma or the struggle, in our mind, an old school coach who wants you to compete and play honestly, like the life skills side of, he's my kind of coach. And they've been coached with kid gloves for so many years. It's been more ego driven by the players, resulting in the firing of coaches. And right now, their line combinations are a mix of complementary mix, a good chemistry mix of ability and talent, but they're buying into the hard work. And I keep looking at the bench, and there were a few suspect shifts. And Sutter had both arms around Lindholm and Gaudreau, but during the second period or early in the third. And their game had been up and down. It was good. But there was a down part in one shift where Gaudreau forgot about a few things and was careless. And he went in and appeared to want to get their attention. So I'm picking up on those little things in his coaching and how he's communicating with them. And the biggest thing I'm learning, and Tom, is watching how he's using Number what? 23. Who's the other
He
star?
was-
Monahan
Monahan.
Yeah,
got him killing
Yeah.
penalties a little bit.
Who he's playing with, how he's playing with them, versus depending on Johnny and Monty to do what they want when they want. And in the past, they've juggled lines to create chemistry, but it hasn't created a team atmosphere. It's trying to get the best out of your best players. In the old school coaching, now it's trying to get the best out of everyone. So I like the way they're playing with the number of players, and I think the so-called most talented players are accepting a 200-foot game, and the other players are playing their usual game better because they're being respected more. And I'm really impressed with the pairing of Giordano and who's the other guy from Vancouver?
Tanev.
That's a hell of a first pairing.
That's a pretty good pairing.
I would never have thought of that. You know, you always look one D, offensive D, and one defensive D. Well, basically, we got two of the best defensive D and pretty good offensive D with Giordano. You know, it's a great mix. So the chemistry of their defense pairings is good, and that rests on the coach. He's got to make those, have that gut feel, and he's doing a good job. I'm impressed and cheering for Sutter more than I am the Flames, because I think if he comes back, and I believe he will, and the players will want to play for him, will let him know, and he can create that kind of a team. You've got to be able to coach the best players the right way, and he's doing it. And that's not hard to do at that level, because like the parents, the GM's going to come down and tell you what you should be doing. Well, he hired him.
Yeah.
And so he's got to support him. And now I think he's in a good spot. So
He's got a 3-year deal, so.
Yeah, he'll be there.
And the thing I like watching the bench whenever we get a shot at it is when Darryl's communicating, there's no question who's in charge. There's no question as to what he's asking.
Yeah.
And indirectly telling.
Yeah.
He's very direct. He's very outwardly, he doesn't hide his feelings. If he's not happy with you, you know he's not happy with you, and you'd better be paying attention to him.
Well,
That's been lacking in the Flames for way too long.
Yeah.
And it's going to take more time yet, I think. But yeah, the last couple of games have showed some positive returns.
I noticed one of the commentators last night was talking about one of the players' ice time being cut down by about 3 minutes by Darryl Sutter, and he was wondering if Darryl Sutter didn't like him as a player. Well, I didn't think. I'm thinking to myself, you haven't played the game and you don't know much about team, because what he's done is he's letting all 4 lines play, and obviously your high-end guys are going to get a little bit more on the power play, but he's got guys that are playing the right amount of minutes now, and they'll be able to go out there and execute.
Agreed.
The telling moment for Sutter, Goodrow's 500th game. And he was interviewed after that game. Now that's when you're coaching. They're watching, they're listening, the world is listening to me. He better be better.
He better be better. He better have more energy in his 500th than he did in his 499th.
Yeah. So
Right.
that's what I call, he knows he's drawn the line. That's his riot act.
Yeah.
And
that wasn't an accidental comment.
Oh no. And that's why he's a good coach. And
Well,
today's
without
player,
ripping.
they need that.
Yeah, exactly. The best to me is always being direct and honest. You can't pussyfoot around, and players want to know. They want to know what they're doing right and what they're doing wrong, right?
Yeah.
Like, they want to be coached. I don't think there's any doubt about that. They want to win, and they're going to buy in if you give them the right reasons.
No, he's doing a good job that way. I'm still cheering for him.
They were talking about Lucic getting the Gordie Howe hat trick and how often Gordie got 2 of them, eh? And Preston played with Gordie Howe in Houston. And he says, well, a real Gordie Howe hat trick, he gets a goal assist and cuts the guy for 12.
That's about right. That's about right.
I'm really impressed with Lucic. I think he to me is the most important player on that team. You look at everybody they play against. He's there. They're not going to be intimidated because of his presence. And he plays pretty good hockey. He makes good short passes. There's times he turns it over, but you don't get upset because he competes so hard. And I'm impressed with him. I got a good feeling about the way he's playing and the way Sutter's getting the most out of him and a lot of guys. But that's good.
Boy, I call guys like Lucic the regulators. You got to have one.
Yeah.
Right. You don't necessarily have to be out there fighting all the time, but you got to be able to calm situations down. All you got to do is skate by somebody and tell them.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. He does a great job of being the regulator out there.
I call it the equalizer.
Yep. Same thing. Yep. You need a gun in the holster. You don't necessarily have to pull it.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you do, he's pretty good at it. So
yeah, there's not many better.
I don't know if he's lost a fight before, but
not many, I wouldn't think.
It's
big man.
Yeah. But anyway, guys, I think it's been a great session, and thanks for all your input. And boy, I've got lots of notes here, stuff to work on for a week, and I hope all goes well with you guys. I've had both my shots now.
I've had one.
Next week for me.
First one, Rick?
Yeah.
Tom, what about you?
I've had one. My wife and I both had one.
Any effects?
Let us know when the second one's on tap.